This week has been full of massive stories in British political news, with everything from the special relationship to the Hillsborough Law being talked about and discussed. When your newsfeed is filled with things like that, it's no wonder that people are annoyed, concerned and confused. The roundup by News of the Week will cut through all of that and explain news clearly and accessibly, whilst giving you the context and balanced, nuanced analysis. Just a reminder, you can read this episode and check out my sources on newsoftheweek.net, where you can access all of News of the Week's other content as well. We'll start with Sky News reporting of a potential rebellion over changes which could trigger a row with 100 MPs. The issue here comes from potential changes to a manifesto commitment to cap rent payments, or specifically the amount paid in ground rent. Ground rent is the charge paid by a tenant for their home to be on land they don't own. It's controversial and was due to be scrapped before the legislation was delayed. One Labour MP called the prospect of a change a betrayal to the 5.5 million leaseholders in Britain, but regardless, the reason for the concern and potential delay from the government is that the Chancellor is concerned changes would deter private investors. These concerns have been doubted since the Conservatives were planning their own legislation over ground rent when they were in power, and analysis at the time found a negligible impact to private investment, putting the Chancellor in a tricky place. The obvious question here, though, is a rebellion of 100 people likely? At the moment, it's based on reported concern rather than action. It's possible there is more to the delay than these concerns, and it's not certain that all those MPs would actually rebel. That said, those MPs do represent leaseholders, and their political incentives do align with renters. And stories like this one rarely appear from nowhere. So while we can't be sure, given the pattern of delays over the last year, if I had to lean one way, I'd say yes, it is more likely. Next, the BBC reported that the first asylum seekers have been moved to a former army training camp. The Home Office has confirmed that 27 asylum seekers have been relocated to Crowborough training camp, which can hold up to 500 people. The government says this move is part of plans to end the use of asylum hotels for asylum seekers, with the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood saying that this is just the start. In terms of numbers, the BBC noted that 9 million a day was being spent on housing asylum seekers by the Conservatives, who were in power when the use of hotels sharply rose, peaking at housing over 56,000 people. The exact numbers at the moment aren't available in terms of how many asylum seekers are being housed in hotels, but there is speculation the number is roughly 30,000 plus, which is still ahead of the lowest achieved just before Labour came into power in 20. Now, the higher than lowest numbers and the government's commitment to reducing use goes some way to explain the government's turn toward military sites, which themselves are controversial. To that end, the BBC noted that there has been local opposition, with the BBC including testimony from local residents against the decision and comments from local politicians who criticise the Home Office for not engaging with them. So, the big questions are, how long will military sites be used and whether hotel use will actually fall? Now, the government has committed to ending asylum hotels by 2029 and clearly sees military sites as a cheaper alternative. But these sites are politically contentious. There may also be an ambition to move away from them eventually. How long they'll use will depend on the other work. Border command reforms, returns agreements, legal changes to definitions and processing speed will all factor into how much the government has to use military sites. And if those policies succeed, military sites will be short term. If they don't, their use could last much longer. This week, there was also more news over cancelled or delayed elections. The Telegraph reported that the Tories are preparing to fight Starmer in the Lords over cancelled elections. Now, what this actually relates to is the Liberal Democrat proposal, which would prevent the government from just being able to change the time of elections, meaning delays like this year and last year would need Parliament's consent. The reason the Telegraph is covering this through the Conservatives is because they have supposedly signalled support for a Lib Dem amendment. The Lib Dem amendment is to the Local Government Act from 2000 and would simply limit the extent changes can be pursued through secondary legislation, or basically how much the government can change the law without consulting Parliament. Together, the Lib Dem and Conservative numbers in the Lords could be enough to pass the amendment, but once it reaches the Commons, it's thought that Labour's majority would almost certainly strike it down. Crucially, even if it is passed, it wouldn't affect the delays that we've heard about this year. So why are the parties pushing it in the first place? Well, most likely it's to show opposition to election delays and to prevent the situation from reoccurring next year, especially amid concerns in the Lords about the timeline for Labour's wider reforms. Now, with that in mind, HuffPost covered the Hillsborough Law, reporting it has been pulled amid concerns over its detail. As covered previously on the show, the Hillsborough Law would introduce a legal duty of candour on public bodies, including the police, preventing them from withholding information during investigations. More recently, concerns were raised that this duty could interfere with intelligence services. The government planned an amendment allowing heads of services to decide whether information should be disclosed themselves. But then, in the end, not only was the amendment pulled, the entire bill was. Now, the law was promised in Labour's manifesto, with ministers saying it would right past wrongs and ensure the state could never hide from the people it serves. Reaction from within Labour has been intense, with one government source describing the situation as mortifying, while another senior figure joked, "Has anyone tried just turning the government off?" That suggests there is internal disagreement over the change, which could break their manifesto, but ultimately, all we know so far is that it has been delayed again. There seems to be a trend this month with stories popping up across different weeks. For example, there was more news concerning a potential social media ban this week. The BBC reported there has been a major development over a prospective ban, with an amendment being passed in the House of Lords by 261 votes for to 150 votes against. It would amend the government's schools bill to ban social media for children under the age of 16, and it was backed by the Conservatives, Lib Dems, some crossbenchers, and even two Labour-affiliated peers. As said on the show last week, despite it having cross-party support, the issue remains far from becoming law. Indeed, the government can, and has said it intends to, overturn the amendment in the Commons when it goes there. Instead, and building on signs of support for a ban, which members of the government expressed last week, Number 10 will launch its own 3-month consultation to examine a full ban and other alternatives, like overnight curfews to social media or the removal of compulsive features, or features that encourage compulsive use. This means that while we are a step closer to a potential ban, we now have more clarity over its status and can now say the government is intending to take a more serious and cautious and slower approach, which includes looking at other options. Now, on to news on foreign policy. Another story continued from last week, which was the US president's influence on UK's foreign policy. This week, Trump has both offended UK veterans, politicians, the public, and service personnel before apologising to them and invoking an uncharacteristic display from the Prime Minister. Trump initially said the USA never needed NATO and the UK, observing that NATO troops stayed off the front lines in the Afghanistan war. The reaction was pretty intense from the public and surviving families and veterans, seemingly cross-cutting sections of British society. This is likely because there is a tangible feeling that Trump's comments are plainly wrong. The numbers speak for themselves, with 457 British troops dying in Afghanistan, contributing to the total of 1,160 non-US service personnel who died and the thousands more who were injured. While that shows NATO service members did not stay off the front lines, the conflict also remains the only time that Article 5 has ever been triggered within NATO, being triggered by the USA. And this is the clause that requires members to come to a nation's defence, as though the conflict was their own, and it also demonstrates a need from the USA for the British forces and wider NATO forces. The political and diplomatic reaction was also significant, with Sky News' Beth Rigby saying that Starmer was brimming with anger in his response. He said that while the special relationship is important to the UK's defence and intelligence, he would apologise if it was him who made the comments. Starmer also paid tribute to the service people who were injured and said he considered the president's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling. The response from Starmer was quite pointed compared to his response to Venezuela and matches the stronger stance taken over Greenland. It was not clear at the time how this would affect diplomatic relations, but then on Sunday, the Times noted that Trump responded with a post on his social media platform Truth Social, where he wrote, "The great and brave soldiers of the UK will always be with the USA." He continued, adding that in Afghanistan, 457 people died and many more were badly injured, and that they were among the greatest of all warriors. He finished his post saying that it's a bond too strong to ever be broken, and that the UK military had tremendous heart and soul and was second to none except for the USA. He then said, "We love you and we always will." After this, Downing Street said the two leaders had spoken, discussing the relationship's importance and noting that it will continue to stand the test of time. That means that a dramatic week of comments and insults has led to a reaction from the UK, but not one which will threaten the special relationship between the UK and the USA. Now, the other area of Trump's involvement in foreign policy this week come from there being more developments concerning the Chagos Islands deal. A debate over the deal was scheduled for next week, but was delayed on Friday, reportedly due to the significance of a UK-US treaty from 1966, an issue that was not free of influence from the president. 1966 treaty notes the islands are defined as a British territory, with there being some concern that the treaty is important to the USA and therefore added concern on the British side issues. When UK officials asked the US State Department over this, they referenced a Truth Social post from the president, which called the deal an act of great stupidity. That means it is not clear how much this is just a ploy by the USA to influence foreign policy elsewhere, or how much the State Department actually values the original treaty. I guess we'll all have to wait and see. In other foreign policy news, the UK has approved Chinese plans for a mega embassy, as reported by the BBC. This comes after months of delay, with a 20,000 square foot embassy set to be the biggest in Europe. The £255 million building has been delayed up to now over security concerns, with the security minister saying the intelligence agencies have been integral to the approval process, with him being content with measures adopted. On those measures, a proportionate package of security mitigations has been developed for the site, according to the MI5 Director General and GCHQ's director. The pair did say, though, that it was not possible or realistic to eliminate every risk. Regardless, the site's approval has been a top priority for the Chinese government and has been thought of as crucial to an improved diplomatic relationship with Beijing. As neither the extent of the diplomatic benefits or the security risks have played out, I want to know what you, the listener, think, so let me know in the comments. Moving on to general politics, The Standard reported that the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has breached the MP's code 17 times. The findings come from a parliamentary commissioner for standards who was reviewing failures to declare financial interests worth a total of £384,000 in the required 28-day period. The commissioner concluded that the breaches were inadvertent and were due to staffing and admin issues. The result meant that the matter was not referred to the Committee on Standards, which could have brought harsher consequences. Farage himself accepted the responsibility, writing in November that he had breached the code, apologised, and said that there was no malicious intent. He pointed to the complexity of his interests and said that steps would be taken to avoid future issues. And the Standard also cited a transcript from a meeting between Farage and the Standard Commissioner, where he described himself as shocked by the scale of the administrative error and added that he relies on other people to handle computer-related tasks. Reaction from the parties was universal in condemning the reform leader. Labour said Farage was too distracted trying to recruit failed Tory MPs to get the basics right, and the Lib Dem said he should spend more time in Clapton, his constituency. A spokesperson for Farage responded by highlighting his charitable donations locally, his regular newspaper columns and constituency surgeries, including one held last week. On that last bit, most MPs hold surgeries once or even twice a week, so I'll leave this with you. How do you view Farage's explanation, and does the Commissioner's decision feel proportionate? The other major development this week concerns the Labour Party, where there has been rife speculation that Andy Burnham will try to challenge the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. By far the most dramatic story this week, with changes coming just before I recorded this on Sunday, and that's after already there were changes from the initial script on Friday. It has come from the resignation of a former minister, Andrew Gwynn, from his Manchester seat on health reasons. For context, Gwynn, who I'm not sure I pronounced his name right, previously said he would not vacate his seat or make way for Burnham, and is currently under investigation over offensive messages coming to light. In any case, his resignation has triggered a by-election, which theoretically left the door open for Andy Burnham. Now, in the light of the leadership speculation, an article from The Independent noted that the route to leadership from Burnham was filled with obstacles. These included him resigning from his mayoralty, where he is popular, getting approved as a candidate by the NEC, Labour's National Executive Committee, which is chaired by Starmer faithfuls, and have to win an election, a by-election, which polling by More in Common noted could be a close-run thing between Labour, the Greens and Reform. Before Sunday, this did not look impossible, since Starmer may have faced backlash if Burnham was blocked from standing, and it became clear that Burnham was actually interested after he informed his bosses of that. My original assertion was that a complicated and unusual hypothetical scenario had become ever so slightly more likely, but then on Sunday, just as I was getting ready to record the episode and say that, the NEC blocked Burnham's candidacy. It's obviously not yet clear how much the Labour leadership will be criticised for this, nor is it clear how fierce any backlash will be. But what is now slightly clearer than it has been for most of the week is that we aren't yet at a formal contest between Burnham and Starmer for the leadership, and as it stands, it's unlikely we will be. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Roundup. If you want full detail of this episode, sources, and my written analysis, you can find that on newsoftheweek.net. Thank you for listening. Remember to like this episode, comment what you thought, and share it with your friend. Also subscribe while you're at it. I'll see you next week to help you stay informed. Bye.